You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. So where to with those involved in state capture? My guest, former public protector, Professor Thuli Madonsela, Professor Richard Callan from UCT, and of course also Professor Ivor Chipkin. Professor Chipkin, let's start with you. If we take an institution like SARS, hollowed out, it has 800 vacancies now. It was literally taken over for political purposes. How does giving someone like Tom Moyane amnesty, or someone like a Luther Labello, or whoever else was responsible for what happened at SARS amnesty, does that get us back to, law and order? Does it get us back to constitutionalism? Does it get us back to the rule of law?
Look, I'm not necessarily a fan of. I haven't raised it, and I wouldn't necessarily support it. But I do think that the instinct, which is informing Professor Madonsela, this idea of a distinction between state capture and corruption, I think is an important distinction which we need to maintain. And potentially, they need different kinds of solutions. The SARS story is a fascinating story. It's one which I think I was one of the early people to start calling this a political process of taking over the institution, which I wrote about in 2015 already. Since then, we know a lot about that rogue unit, the so-called rogue unit or the alleged rogue unit. Almost certainly it wasn't rogue in the sense that it was doing illegal things, but what it was probably doing, which I strongly believe in, is that it was developing an intelligence capacity which was far beyond what was needed for collecting tax. And I think it was stepping on the toes of the intelligence agencies, and they had legitimate concerns about what the role of this unit was beginning to play. So this is not simply a game of corruption, of looting. This is a very complex game of politics going on inside and playing itself out in the state. Of course, what happens in the rogue unit, the so-called rogue unit, is that there's an assault on it in the name of a political game. But I don't think we should underestimate and ask real questions about what actually the unit was doing in terms of developing that kind of intelligence capacity. It was certainly playing a political game in its own right. And I think all of that politics gets overlooked by simply focusing on narrow corruption as looting and theft.
Okay, Professor Callan, let me bring you in. If one looks at the NPA currently, if one looks at specifically some of the provincial heads, who are of course incredibly powerful, the president hires and fires them, they have the power to decide whether they're going to prosecute or not. We see in the case of the SABC, for example, last week, the prosecution authorities here in Gauteng said that they're not going to go after the former COO, Hlaudi Motsoeneng, for example. Today we see again public protector going the same route. How does what Ms. Madonsela puts on the table restore a place like the SABC? Who is still going to come out of the woodwork there that we haven't found, for example?
Well, with all due respect to her, I don't think it does help. I think it's a distraction from the good work that is being done by a number of agencies, particularly the National Prosecuting Authority, of course, and its various component parts, including the Hawks, the Zondo Commission, as we've discussed, but also the political leadership in government, and particularly the President, trying to re-establish values of integrity in public life, rebuilding institutions, appointing the right people, and also pushing away and rejecting those who have very different motives and values. All of that is ongoing work. It's hard work. And I come to your question now, because what we've learned over the last 2 years is just the extent to which the network that Ivor Chipkin and his colleagues wrote about in their really so important report, and of course which Thuli Madonsela, when she was public protector, began the process of unearthing in her state capture report. All of that, it ran deep. And it's kind of arm-to-arm, hand-to-hand combat in terms of cleaning out that system. And it's taking a long time. And the National Prosecuting Authority is a very good example of this problem, in the sense that it's a very ornate structure. And there's been a lot of gnashing of teeth, I think, by people who were involved in the legislation that established it, in the sense that too much power is distributed through the system, which means that rogue individuals or units can continue to eat away at the credibility and block and obstruct investigations and prosecutions. And that's one of the reasons why it's taken 2.5 years for the flow of investigations and arrests that we started to see in the last couple of months to come about. I think the attention should be on that. Unless there is a problem that deserves some kind of amnesty consideration, I think it's an unhelpful, with respect, distraction. It's something perhaps, and we're, I think, finding each other on this today, it's something that, as an idea, we could come back to later. I think we need to focus on the systemic corruption. We need to hope that Zondo does a good job with his report. I'm confident he will. He's made a lot of progress in unearthing real evidence about what happened and why. And that's where the focus, I think, should be.
Professor Madonsela, the final word goes to you, 30 seconds. Does your proposal end the culture of impunity?
It certainly does. And also, we shouldn't confine ourselves about where should the conversation be. And this is why we are where we are about closing off gaps around what should we be discussing. Our state was captured. It wasn't a looting thing. As Professor Chipkin says, we had a bunch of individuals capturing elements of the state, repurposing them and looting through them. And in the process, to avoid accountability, they also captured elements of our law enforcement system. And I just want to say one thing. State capture was not about redistribution. Even this whole question about radical economic transformation, it only comes later when Bell Pottinger is already involved. As part of evading accountability, the narrative of white monopoly capital and redistribution or radical economic redistribution comes into the picture.
Okay, your 30 seconds is up. My apologies, Professor Madonsela. This is obviously a conversation that we need to have as a country. Amnesty for those linked to state capture. Does it take us to end the culture of impunity, which is surely what all South Africans want to see? Well, you've had your fix for the week. Join me again next Sunday. Thank you so much for watching.